This is Susan C. Anthony speaking. Welcome to my workshop, Principles of Good Teaching. While the 10 principles I talk about here apply to any teacher, the presentation itself was created for an audience of Christian homeschool moms and dads. First, a little about me so you know who's talking. I was born in Colorado and grew up in a rural area of the Rocky Mountains. There were 2 other kids in my first grade class and 24 others in my high school graduating class. I moved to Alaska in 1979 and taught for 10 years in the Anchorage School District. I resigned that position in order to write, publish, and consult, but in truth, mainly to spend more time with my wonderful husband Dennis, who had retired. I never homeschooled, but I have a really good excuse. No kids. I was intrigued from the beginning, though, of how many characteristics of effective schools are inherent in the homeschool model. Here are my goals for this hour. I will have accomplished what I intend if you leave aware of your strengths as a teacher, even if they're second nature to you and seem to be no big deal. Determined to work toward at least one specific achievable goal to improve your teaching, and encouraged to engage in the ongoing process of improvement. Back to the first item. You're probably not aware that you're doing a lot of things well without even realizing it, just by educating kids at home. I read to my husband every night before bed. And just a side note, I highly recommend reading books aloud as a family and discussing them as you go along. Read books that are slightly above kids' comprehension and teach vocabulary as you go. Don't interrupt the flow of the story too often, but use opportunities to ask kids what they would do if they were in the situation a character faces. Engage with the books and the characters. Let them become part of your lives. By doing this, you're teaching kids to think. A lot of kids stumble when it comes to reading comprehension because they never learn to think. Anyway, one book I read to my husband recently was Eden's Outcasts, about Louisa May Alcott's father and family. You might recognize Louisa May Alcott as the author of America's first book for young girls, Little Women. Louisa's father, Bronson, was a transcendentalist philosopher, a good friend of Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was very interested in educating young minds, and he believed that the ideal classroom should replicate the nurturing atmosphere of a loving family. Why replicate it, I thought. Just teach kids at home to start with. At the time, the early 1800s, most schooling actually did take place at home. Alcott was a contemporary of Horace Mann, who started the movement toward public non-sectarian or non-religious schools, supported through taxation. Mann was very progressive and secular. He opposed corporal punishment and wanted schools to diversify and reduce or eliminate religious instruction. You might be interested sometime in reading the history of public schooling in America. While you're listening today, note what you're already doing well, maybe without even knowing it. Also be on the lookout for 1 or 2 specific actions that you want to take to improve your own teaching. When you have those down, you can choose a new objective. One thing at a time. Don't overload yourself or you'll get discouraged. A handout is available to download at susancanthony.com. The first 2 pages have a list of 10 principles with a checklist of specifics. You can check off things that are already going well in your homeschool and then use this as a source from which to choose 1 or 2 things at a time to improve. The 3rd page of the handout is Madeline Hunter's lesson design. I'll show this to you later. While preparing this workshop, I asked teacher friends what 1 or 2 things they considered the most valuable from all their years of university and grad school. This lesson design was mentioned a lot. The last page has a couple of other things that teachers, including me, found useful and applicable. I've always been interested in why some schools and educational environments are so much better than others. In excellent schools, all other things equal, kids achieve more, like it better, are healthier and happier. The atmosphere is relaxed, positive, and productive. How do school leaders accomplish that, I wondered, and what can we learn from them? I have a degree in education. Many of you do not. I'll have to say there are pluses and minuses to having a degree. For one thing, I spent 4 years supposedly learning how to teach children without spending very much time with children. I learned a lot of philosophy and theory, but my feet weren't on the ground. In retrospect, I think I was brainwashed. It took years to recover from that. I may never fully recover. If you're sensitive to the ebb and flow of kids' learning, your kids will be your best teachers as to what works and what doesn't work. Nevertheless, some of what is taught in schools of education is very useful. One example is what's called wait time. Especially in America, conversations proceed rapidly like ping pong. Teachers ask questions and expect quick answers, but kids need time to think. I trained myself to bite my tongue and wait. In a classroom, I didn't call on the first child who raised his or her hand. I silently acknowledged her and waited. After several children raised their hand, I'd call on the first child or sometimes someone else. After you get an answer, wait some more to allow children to expound. You help kids learn to think and express their thoughts when you bite your tongue and learn to utilize the pregnant pause. For some of you, wait time might be the one idea you take home to practice. But don't check out. There's a lot more. Even if you've chosen a goal, you want a sense of the big picture. Maybe you'll find something else you want to work on after you've incorporated wait time. I asked not only experienced teachers, but experienced homeschoolers to share their best advice for new teachers. And I made a huge pile of cards that fit into the 10 categories I'll be talking about today. Just a few preliminary comments. No school is perfect. Don't strive for perfection. Aim to do your very best and to keep improving. Some teachers break all the rules and still do an incredible job. The principles here are common to most effective schools, not all. Some of my strong recommendations may not be appropriate for you. You be the judge of that. If you're happy with results you're getting, don't change. Focus on your strengths. Make a list of them and choose at most 1 or 2 goals at a time. I wrote all the best advice and everything I learned about effective schools on index cards. Here are the 10 categories into which my big pile of cards fell. Number 1, vision and goals. Number 2, nurturing relationships. 3 is structure. 4, consistency. 5, balance. 6, communication. 7, planning and preparation. 8, instruction. 9, practice. And 10, evaluation and accountability. This is a long list, but don't panic. Some of these won't take much time to talk about. Notice that the first 6 items on the list have to do with the context in which learning takes place. We'll talk about the 10 things one at a time. First, vision and goals. The principle here is the success of any endeavor depends on the ability of its leaders to hold on to the vision and to set achievable goals that take them from the current reality to the realization of the vision. Notice it says any endeavor. When my husband started praying with me at the start of each day, I thought, that's amazing. Prayers actually help us hold on to our vision of the kind of people we want to be, or more accurately for Christians, the kind of people God wants us to be. Prayer includes asking God for assistance in the realization of that vision. Both parents ideally share the vision for the homeschool. This is a potential strength of homeschooling. In a public school, hundreds of teachers, parents, and students are involved, and they rarely share the same vision. In a family, only mom and dad have to agree on their vision and goals. A vision provides a source of inspiration when details become overwhelming. A clearly stated vision helps you put first things first. It's much easier to make decisions in the heat of action when you have a strong sense of priorities. Post your vision statement or write it on the inside cover of your plan book. Look at it frequently. Read it daily to maintain a long-term focus. You can revise your vision statement anytime you wish. It's yours. I'm going to read a sample of a vision statement just to give you an idea of what you might want to include. If you like this one, if it makes your heart sing, feel free to copy it and tweak it to fit. Our vision for our children is that they will develop into well-rounded, academically sound, physically healthy, spiritually strong adults who value integrity and have the strength of character to stand for what is right. We want them to internalize the virtues of humility, responsibility, gentleness, justice, self-discipline, resourcefulness, and generosity. We wish for them to enjoy learning, develop a strong work ethic, be confident of their ability to achieve and overcome obstacles, and have a good background of foundational knowledge and skills. We want them to leave home with a sense of life's transcendent purpose, as well as vocational and entrepreneurial skills. We wish for them to marry well, establish stable homes, and become mature, responsible, contributing citizens whose lives attract others to Jesus. You want a vision statement that tugs at your heart. You might say it helps you remember the grand view you saw on a clear day, so you can bring to mind why you set out on this journey and where you're headed when it's foggy. Mount McKinley is the biggest mountain in North America. It's often shrouded with clouds. Visitors come from all over the world to see the mountain, and only the lucky ones actually do. But at the Eielson Visitor Center, from which you get the closest view on a clear day, there's a wall-sized photo of the mountain. If you can't see the mountain itself, you can at least look at an image. Your vision statement can serve the same purpose. You've probably heard this saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It actually begins with determining where you want to go and how you plan to get there. If your steps aren't headed in the right direction, you'll end up lost. So, my recommendation is, if you haven't put your vision into words, make it a topic of conversation with your spouse. Verbalize it, and then read it frequently. Speaking of a journey of 1,000 miles, we actually witnessed the first steps of a man who walked more than 1,000 miles in a foot race on the Iditarod Trail. He walked from Anchorage to Nome in a race called the Iditasport, towing a small sled. His name is Roberto. When we met him, he was 56 years old. He had one good eye, was 6 feet 5 inches tall, and came from the mountains of Italy, where he made cheese. He had won the race for several years. He's always in last place for the first several days, but in a long marathon, speed counts for a whole lot less than endurance. He told us he focuses on only 3 hours at a time. When the 3 hours is over, he focuses on the next 3 hours. He sets a long-term goal and then achievable short-term goals that take him toward it. He walks on average 22 hours and 50 miles a day. Wow. Now we'll talk about number 2, nurturing relationships. The principle is the best learning happens within a context of caring. Ideally, students feel they are an important part of a group. You might have heard the saying, children don't care what you know until they know that you care. No one cares more about your kids than you do. This is an inherent strength of homeschooling. There are many caring teachers, but no matter how much they care, that relationship can never be as deep or significant as a parent-child relationship. Friends and teachers come and go. Family is forever. A few years ago, Fortune magazine reported a research study concluding that the number one indicator of success for a child is a good relationship with a nurturing adult. The number one indicator. Touching is one of the best ways to communicate caring. Even a light touch can be incredibly powerful. I learned this by experience in a university class I took. As we students were working, the teacher walked around the room monitoring. At one point, she lightly touched me on the shoulder and said, "Good job." I'll never forget how much more powerful an effect those words had when accompanied by that light touch. It's been known for years that babies who are not touched will die. Most people in this high-tech world are starving for touch. Teachers are discouraged or even prohibited from touching children. You, as a parent, have no such restrictions. Use the power of touch to show your kids how much you care about them, and your teaching will be more effective. So, my recommendation? If you were reared in a family that didn't hug or touch, make it a goal to change that. In the best schools, kids have a sense of what we used to call school spirit. They identify themselves with the school culture and are proud to be part of it. Families also have a culture. It consists of family history, special stories, the jokes you like, the games you play, the way you do things, your customs and traditions. It's everything that distinguishes you as a family. You may not be consciously aware of it, but it exists. So, my recommendation? You can change and enhance your family culture by choice. Get together, choose a motto, make a flag, write a family history, or start a new vision. I stayed with a homeschooling family in Kodiak, Alaska some years ago that had a tradition they called Fun Food Friday. No one ate ice cream, sweet treats, or junk food the other 6 days of the week, but on Fun Food Friday, the little ones got to choose the menu for the family, and it always included something delicious. You've probably known of homeschooling families where everyone dresses the same. That's another way of enhancing kids' identification with the family culture. American culture emphasizes individualism almost to a fault, and one result is a lot of lonely, alienated young people who struggle to find who they are and seek a group with whom to identify, even if that group is a gang. So number 1, vision and goals is a potential strength of homeschooling. Number 2, nurturing relationships is an inherent strength. Now we'll talk about something that is not an inherent strength of homeschooling. We'll spend a little extra time on this one because if you can make it a strength of your homeschool, you will reap rewards for years. The principle is the most effective schools are well organized and structured. It is possible to have an unstructured environment where children learn effectively, but it's unusual. Structure can be a big challenge for homeschoolers, especially if there are babies in the house. Without some structure, days fly by and nothing gets done. Routine is an element of long-lasting and healthy marriages. I read a book years ago called Lucky in Love. The authors had investigated numerous happy, long-term marriages to see what they had in common. One commonality was they all had comfortable routines for starting the day, ending the day, taking care of chores, and so on. Here's an excerpt from that book. The stable family begins each morning with a cherished pattern of waking, rising, greeting the day. One partner always makes the coffee. One partner always walks the dog. Both partners read the paper over breakfast. All of the happy couples, as well as most of the not-so-happy but stable couples with whom I spoke, led married lives kept on track by various daily routines. A daily routine works by making life predictable. Family members know what they are supposed to be doing and when. Life makes sense. The routine reinforces their sense of family reality, allowing people to take their families for granted, to believe without question that when they wake up in the morning, the family will still be there. Routines, in short, promote confidence. They promote trust in the natural and inevitable existence of the marriage. They do not, in and of themselves, produce happiness, but they underlie and support the blessing. They are a necessary, if far from sufficient condition for the thriving marriage. In practice, this means that those of us who feel our marriages, or in this case our homeschools, to be adrift, would do well to set about creating routine where there has been none. Establish a family dinner hour. Set a timeline setting a time at which both partners put work papers aside to concentrate on each other. Brew each other a fresh cup of coffee each morning. All of these small, routinized gestures strengthen a marriage much more than one might think. In the happiest of marriages, such small, repeated detail becomes a source of enduring pleasure and strength. Routine is also of crucial importance to children. One study of National Merit Scholarship finalists found that the only factor these high achievers had in common was that all of them ate dinner together with their families nightly. The only factor, isn't that amazing? The only factor that distinguished National Merit Scholarship finalists from other kids was that they ate dinner together with their families nightly. Since microwaves were invented, it's harder to find families that eat dinner together every night. Family discussions over dinner are one of the best ways to teach kids how to think. Dad can lead the discussions, and through them keep in touch with what kids are learning. Help them learn to apply what they've learned as they ponder real situations and hold them accountable in a loving way. One reason some of you are homeschooling is you feel stifled by structure and don't want to stifle the kids. Well, too much structure will constrain flexibility. Unless you have some structure, nothing will get accomplished. In my experience, most children crave structure. They are very unproductive without it. Structure increases what is called time on task. Time on task is another concept I found very useful. In any school, a certain amount of time is taken up with mundane tasks, going to the bathroom, getting books and materials out and ready to go, eating lunch, and so forth. Time on task is the amount of time spent actually studying and learning. The most effective schools streamline routines to maximize the time on task. Schedules and norms help people make sense of a chaotic, distracting world. Have a norm from which to vary. I read an article in a homeschooling magazine a while back called A Day at Our House. I was impressed by how the kids knew there is a schedule or a structure, even when it wasn't followed. Here's a quote. "Normally we practice piano at 10 o'clock, but Dad is on a midnight schedule this week, so we'll wait until later." A norm existed from which the family could then deviate as needed. A daily schedule gives kids and adults a sense of direction. It improves communication and prevents misunderstandings. My husband told me that the single most important thing he learned in student teaching was to write the day's schedule on the board every day before the kids came in. A schedule gives the teacher, as well as the kids, a sense of security and direction. It's a means of communication that prevents misunderstandings. I have several recommendations related to structuring your learning environment. Decide for yourself which might work best in your family. Number 1, write a daily schedule. Number 2, give each individual a checklist of tasks and assignments for the day. Limit outside activities to certain days. Don't answer calls between certain hours. Use Dad to set up fences to protect time. Train the baby to sit quietly in your lap and set up routines and systems for housework. A comment about number 5. One of Dad's roles in the homeschool can be as principal or administrator. He can work outside the home and not participate in the actual lessons, yet fulfill a vital role in backing his wife by setting up what I call fences to shield the homeschool from unnecessary pressures and distractions. When I taught, I didn't always appreciate the importance of good administrators. They hold the vision, set long-range goals, and ensure that people doing the actual work have the resources and the time they need to do the job they have been assigned. And a comment about number 6. One homeschool mom told me how she did this. She wanted to keep her baby with her in church, not put him in the nursery. So she taught him to sit quietly for an hour without fussing. She trained him toward this goal a little at a time by holding him a certain way for 5 quiet minutes, then paying him lots of attention. Then 10 quiet minutes and lots of attention. Eventually, she worked all the way to 60 minutes, at the end of which he got 100% of Mom's attention. If a baby knows that 100% of Mom's attention will soon be coming his way, he has less need to compete for that attention, theoretically. So far, we've talked about visions and goals, nurturing relationships, and structure. Number 4, consistency is closely related to structure. The principle is, when it comes to behavior management, consistency beats severity every time. Let's read through this and I'll make some comments afterward. Classroom management takes a lot of teacher time. Small but consistent consequences for minor misbehavior pay big dividends in the long run. Kids need to trust you, mean what you say. You owe it to your kids to do what you promise. Don't threaten, follow through. Don't lie to kids. If you say it, do it. Take time to train children in good habits. Bad habits are hard to break, we all know that, but good habits are just as hard to break. When children are defiant, punishment may be necessary. Be consistent and don't get angry. So, back to number 1, classroom management taking a lot of teacher time. Remember, we were talking about time on tasks. If kids' behavior is not under control, not much will get done. One of the most important things I learned in my tenure as a teacher is that small but consistent consequences for minor misbehavior make a huge difference in the long run. Kids need to trust you. They need to know that you mean what you say. Psychologists have determined that the most damaging aspect of being a child in an alcoholic family is the lack of consistency. Kids don't know what to expect. Promises aren't kept. Kids can't depend on their parents for stability. Adult children raised in homes where parents were inconsistent often have the same psychological symptoms as adult children of alcoholics, even if the parents didn't drink at all. You owe it to your kids to do what you promise. If you tell your kids they must observe a rule or a standard of behavior, and they don't, you owe it to them to enforce the rule. You're doing them a favor by enforcing it. It's our tendency as adults to overlook minor misbehavior until it becomes major, or until we have a headache one day and then come down hard with a big consequence, like grounding kids for a month. Often, after a crisis passes, we relent and renege on the consequences. That is not a good idea. That's inconsistent. As far as good habits, it says there it's just as hard to break a good habit as a bad one, but good habits make life better instead of worse. Good habits are a gift you can give your children that will keep on giving throughout their entire life. Training is distinct in some ways from teaching. It requires day after day of consistency and reinforcement until a behavior becomes natural. A few years ago, I attended a home church in Indiana. After church, a young mom of twins was asking the older mothers there for advice on how to deal with her increasingly rebellious 2-year-olds. One mom said that she starts when babies are very small to train them so that when she gives them a command and it counts, they respond automatically. She said, for example, several times a day I'll say, "Jennifer, come to mommy," and then I reward her when she comes. At that moment, Jennifer, who was playing with other babies on the floor, lifted her head, looked at her mom, and crawled over to her. Even though the words were in the midst of an otherwise unintelligible sentence, the baby responded automatically. That was a great lesson for everyone there. When children are defiant, punishment is sometimes necessary. Although a lot of training can be done with just positive reinforcement, you can't avoid the need for punishment with every child all the time. Be consistent and unemotional. Be the grown-up. The recommendation here for consistency is take time to communicate with your spouse and formulate a system for dealing with behavior. Be accountable to each other for consistency with the kids. The 5th principle concerns balance. This is a short and easy one. Strive for balance in everything. You might have heard of what's called the golden mean. In philosophy, especially Aristotle's philosophy, the golden mean is the desirable middle between two extremes, one of excess and the other of deficiency. Here are some examples of things you should strive to keep in balance. Balance between being too permissive and too strict. Balance between bookwork and hands-on activities. Balance between focus time and free time. Balance between work, study, and play. Balance between mind, body, and spirit activities. Balance between feeling and thinking. Balance between routine and special activities. Balance between talking and listening. Balance between individual and group activities. Balance between indoor and outdoor activities. And balance between academic learning and art, music, and drama. And here's the recommendation. Look over your long-term and weekly plans to evaluate whether anything is seriously out of balance, and then work to rectify that. The last principle related to the context of education is communication. And the principle is, good communication is an essential component of good education. Communication is an inherent strength of the homeschooling model because usually there are fewer children per adult. Not always. I once met a young, energetic homeschool mom in Colorado who had 23 kids. At least half of them were adopted, and she was homeschooling them all. I was in awe. Two-way communication is important. Kids need time to talk as well as listen, and adults need to listen attentively and respectfully as well as talk. Here are some recommendations. Use wait time. Give kids time to think. Discuss ideas and current events as a family. Talk slightly above the child's level. Praise children honestly. Make sure they know what's expected. Praise them immediately and specifically, and use character words like kind and courageous. And my last recommendation here, schedule a listening time for each child. We'll talk a little more about that. We talked about wait time earlier and about discussing things around the family dinner table, and that the only thing all National Merit Scholars were found by researchers to have in common was they ate dinner with their families around a table. I talked earlier about reading aloud to kids from books slightly above their reading level. It's the same with talking. Use big words when you're talking and define them. Research shows that mothers have an almost innate ability to talk just enough above the kids' level that they're constantly stretching kids' store of knowledge and concepts. When you're talking to your child, use praise more than criticism. Research shows that most people need to hear about 9 positive things for every negative thing in order to stay encouraged and be open to constructive criticism. Remember, I said you must tell kids the truth. They need to know they can trust you. Don't make up good things to say in order to enhance their self-esteem. Be truthful with them. Always be on the lookout for truthful, positive things to say. Look for demonstrations of good character and be specific about what you saw. It's quite all right to say the same positive thing again and again. You were kind. You showed persistence there. You demonstrated courage in that situation. I heard the idea of listening time in a graduate class. The teacher and her husband had 2 kids. They didn't want the kids to drift away during the adolescent years like so many kids do, so they started a listening time every Sunday after church. She would take one child and he'd take the other. They switched off periodically, so each of them had time with each child over the course of the year. The goal was to give the kids 100% of parental attention and just let the kids talk about whatever they chose. No lectures or advice, just listening. She said it was hard to bite her tongue and just listen to her child for an hour, especially at first. But after listening time became routine, the kids actually saved up things to talk about during that time, things that were important to them, but maybe a little scary to broach. Listening time continued all the way through high school. When their daughter graduated and went off to college, they thought, wow, finally, now one of us will have a break from listening time. But no, the first Sunday at the customary time, the phone rang. The daughter was calling from college for listening time. The parents complied and in this way kept close touch with their daughter all the way through the college years. Eventually, when she got married, they thought, finally, we're done with listening time. But no. The Sunday after her wedding, at the customary time, both she and her husband were on the phone for listening time. Eventually, the young couple was weaned, so they became each other's best listeners. Now we'll address some things that apply directly to teaching itself, as distinct from the context in which teaching occurs. Don't ever forget, though, that the context is extremely important. The very best teaching in a poor context is less effective than average teaching in a good context. So, planning and preparation. The principle here is simple. Good teaching depends on good planning. Here's one very worthwhile thing I learned at college. These are the aspects of planning. Diagnosis and prescription. Know what kids know what they need to know, and teach the difference. Assessing readiness. Something's too hard? Back off when their eyes glaze over. Too easy? Move ahead. Aim for about an 80% success rate at the very least. Task analysis is breaking a large chunk of learning into small sequential steps. The mastery of early steps makes later ones seem a lot easier. And assess prerequisites. What do kids need to know before you start a lesson to be ready for it? As a parent, you know what your kids know a lot more than any teacher could. You know where they've been and what they've seen. You may not have as good an idea as a teacher of what they need to know, but you can rectify that. There are lots of books and lists to help you. Assessing kids' readiness is a pretty simple thing to do. You guess and try something. If their eyes glaze over, it's too hard. Back off. Don't push until you see tears. Regroup. If something is too simple, move on. Don't skip anything, just don't spend as much time on it. Aim for 80 to 90% success rate on exercises while they're learning something new. Be careful not to allow them to practice errors. Task analysis is what makes a good teacher, as opposed to a well-educated person. Task analysis means breaking a large chunk of learning into small sequential steps. Some very well-educated people are terrible teachers. They've mastered their subject and moved on. They have no memory of the step-by-step process by which they learned and no patience to recreate it. Some people who have trouble learning themselves become excellent teachers because they can do a better job of task analysis. The smaller and better sequenced the chunks of learning are, the easier it will be for learners of all abilities to progress through them. I want to emphasize here the importance of making sure kids master early foundational steps in a course of learning. This applies especially to math. A lot of problems kids have in math in junior or senior high school go back to the fact that their primary grade teachers introduced foundational concepts, had the kids practice a little, and then moved on, assuming that what they didn't learn this year they'd pick up the next year. That's not a good idea, especially in math. Mastering early steps makes later ones much easier. Even virtuoso pianists regularly practice scales, and it's not because they don't know them. They realize that mastery involves building and maintaining strong foundational skills. And concerning prerequisites, decide what kids need to know in order to be able to do what you're asking them to do. Teach or review the prerequisites first. Research, reteach, and review as often as necessary. Here are recommendations related to planning and preparation. You need both long-term and short-term plans, like Roberto, who we talked about before. His long-term plan was to walk 1,000 miles. His short-term plan was to walk 3 hours, and then another 3 hours. You cannot neglect planning for long without paying a price. Discipline yourself to schedule time and use it to plan. Don't allow yourself to be distracted. Schedule uninterrupted planning time. Get help from dad or someone else. Guard your planning time. No housework or phone calls. Formulate long-term plans once a year and short-term plans once a week. Use pencil and alter your plans as needed. They're your plans. Things happen. You just want to have a plan. And here we are finally to the actual teaching. Everything so far has pertained to the foundation for good teaching. And remember the importance of foundations. Just a little story here. We have a house in Anchorage with a lovely artesian well. Some years ago, a friend of ours who was living in the basement complained about water on the floor of the garage outside her door. We searched for the problem, and it appeared the foundation was leaking and the water from our well was providing a small, steady flow of water. We tried everything to slow or stop the leak without success. We finally put in a sump pump, but that wasn't a long-term solution. Eventually, we had to hire someone to dig to the base of the foundation, seal it from the outside, and install a drainage system around it. That solved the problem, but it was a big, expensive deal that tore up our whole lawn and garden. All this is to say that foundations are very important. The principle concerning instruction is simple. Quality instruction is a key component of quality education. A wonderful teacher named Madeline Hunter spent a lot of time thinking about what makes for a good, effective lesson. She came up with a lesson design format that many teachers mentioned as one of the most valuable things they learned in college. Not everything teachers do involves teaching a lesson per se. Kids need lots of review and practice, and you don't want to string lesson after lesson after lesson. First lessons in any new area of study are especially important. If a child succeeds in a first lesson, he thinks, "This is easy, I can do this." If a child fails in a first lesson, he might think, "This is too hard, I can't do this." Those thoughts are powerful and affect a child's motivation to apply himself and try. If you carefully construct first lessons, you can usually lighten up later on. The first thing Dr. Hunter listed was standards, including structure, efficient routines, materials ready, behavior, and expectations. We've spent most of the time so far in this workshop talking about what I call the context for learning. That's where the standards reside. Children need to know what you expect. When introducing a lesson, the teacher first sets the stage. Dr. Hunter called this the anticipatory set. Basically, you tell kids what you're going to tell them. That's the anticipatory set. I'm going to model setting the stage for a lesson on fractions. As I move from step to step, the part I'm illustrating will be highlighted on the slide. Today you will learn how to tell which of two fractional pieces is larger. What will you learn? And students answer, how to tell which of two fractional pieces is larger. Being able to tell which of two fractional pieces is larger is a lot different than knowing which of two whole numbers is larger. Because of the difference, a lot of students become very confused in later lessons. If you learn this concept now, later lessons in fractions will be easier for you. When things are easier, they're a lot more fun. Why is it important to know how to tell which of two fractional pieces is larger? And kids would answer, so we won't be confused later on. You'll be using fraction kits and pieces, just like you did yesterday. Tomorrow, there will be a quiz on everything you've learned so far. Identifying fractions, naming fractions, labeling the numerator and denominator, telling how many parts are in a whole, and telling which fractional part is larger, which is what we'll learn today. What will you learn today? Why is it important to know? And when will the quiz be given? Notice that I incorporated questions to check for understanding throughout. Checks for understanding should be woven into every step of instruction. Doing this keeps kids engaged and on their toes. Now we'll move to instruction, beginning with review. In review, what is a fraction? Kids answer, part of a whole. In a fraction, where is the numerator? Where is the denominator? What does the denominator tell us? What does the numerator tell us? Yesterday you learned how many parts are in a whole. How many halves are in a whole? Kids answered 2 halves, and the teacher would write on the board 2 halves equal 1. How many sixths are in a whole? How many twelfths are in a whole? How many hundredths are in a whole? How do you know? And the kids answer, if you cut something into 6 equal parts and you have all 6 of them, you have the whole thing. So that's review. You will use the symbols for greater than and less than, and then as a teacher, write them for kids to see. Which side will be toward the larger value? Greater than, with the open side will be towards the larger value. Which fraction does the point to? And the answer, the smaller value. Lay out your fraction pieces like you did yesterday, and while kids are doing this, the teacher passes out the worksheets. Here's what their desktop might look like. And here's the worksheet. Now we're to modeling. The first problem on your worksheet asks you to compare 1/2 and 1/3. Pick up the two pieces and look at them like this. And the teacher holds up 1/2 and 1/3. Which is larger? 1/2. Then write the symbol for greater than between 1/2 and 1/3. 1/2 is greater than 1/3. Be sure to use pieces for all the problems until you get to the dotted line. By that time, you should know the pattern and be able to answer the rest of the problems just using your head without any pieces. Even though you may see the pattern right away, please hold up the pieces and look at them anyway until you reach the dotted line. The reason for this is that you're training your mind. Even years from now, after you haven't thought about fractions for a long time, I want you to be able to visualize the pieces in your mind. That will help you remember how to add and subtract them. Actually holding them up and looking at them makes an impression on your mind. What are you supposed to do with the problems above the dotted line? Use the pieces. How about the problems below the dotted line? Use your head. And just a comment here, when teaching, remember to regularly check for understanding. Work this in everywhere. By now, the kids should know what you're asking them to do and be able to do it. Guided practice gives them the chance to actually do it. We'll talk more about practice later. The teacher should supervise closely to be sure the kids understand what to do and how to do it. Ask children to tell you the pattern as soon as they figure it out, and then congratulate them. Even if they see the pattern immediately, they should hold up the pieces to compare until they get to the dotted line, and then apply the rule without using pieces. For closure, when most children have finished or nearly finished the worksheet, ask, what is the rule? And the rule is, the larger the denominator is, the smaller the piece. Why is a half larger than a third, even though 2 is smaller than 3? The denominator stands for how many equal pieces a whole has been cut into. If I share a candy bar with one other friend, we each get more than if I share it with 2 other friends. 1/2 is therefore more than 1/3. Why is a fourth larger than an eighth? And so on and so forth until you really know that the kids get the concept. And then you just finish by saying, good job. I think you have a good grasp of the basic concepts of fractions. Tomorrow will be a quiz, and I think you'll do well. Any questions? Independent practice is otherwise known as homework. As I said, we'll talk more about practice in the next step. So that's it, a Madeline Hunter lesson. To summarize lesson design, you tell them what you're going to tell them. That's the anticipatory set. Then you tell them, that's the instruction. And you tell them what you told them, which is the closure. My recommendation for improving your instruction is learn Madeline Hunter's lesson design format and keep it in mind as you plan and teach. Not all lessons need all elements, but know when you leave something out and do it for a purpose. Work to improve one aspect of your instruction at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself. I mentioned earlier that we would talk about practice. That's principle number 9. It's a simple principle with compliments to Green Bay Packer coach Vince Lombardi. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. When I first started teaching, I thought I was supposed to teach, assign, and grade. I thought I had to grade everything. The idea of practice without penalty was a breakthrough idea for me. Once I was complaining about all the papers I had to check in the teacher's lounge, and another teacher said, "You might actually be doing kids a disservice by doing all the checking for them." That sentence stopped me short and changed my approach to teaching. I didn't want to do kids a disservice. I began to understand that kids need to practice new skills without worrying about grades or evaluation. For guided practice, you want to be right there. Guided practice is practice without penalty. No grades. Supervise it closely. Give immediate positive or corrective feedback. Encourage, touch, ensure the concept is understood, and do not allow children to practice errors. After 10 or more problems are done correctly, you can move on into independent practice, but continue to come back and monitor periodically to make sure everything's still going well. Now, independent practice. The purpose of practice is strengthening and reinforcing learning. If new learning isn't recalled or used within 24 hours, the recall rate drops to about 75%. If it's not used within 48 hours, the recall drops to 60%. If not used within 72 hours, you wasted your time teaching it in the first place. Sorry about the misprint there. Students must not only get concepts into their minds, they must be able to get them out when required. Review concepts daily right after instruction and then periodically. Don't just give kids a test, count something as learned, and then move on and leave it to gather dust. You don't want kids to get the idea that once they've learned something and passed a test on it, they can just delete it from their minds and move on. Mix practice of differing concepts over time. You want to practice a new fact or skill intensely the first few days. When kids seem to know it, mix it in with something new and then fade back on it, but keep it going. Review and reteach as often as necessary. Hold kids accountable for remembering what you've taught. If they don't remember, reteach, review, and keep on practicing until they eventually do. Be patient. So here are some recommendations related to practice. Allow for practice without penalty. Carefully plan first lessons in any new area. Incorporate frequent checks for understanding during which students repeat directions, summarize what they're supposed to do, verbalize what they've learned, etc. I have to admit that when I first heard the idea of having kids answer me back out loud in a classroom situation, I thought that it wouldn't work very well. But it does. Kids will talk anyway. Kids are natural talkers. And so if they're talking about what they're learning, it's a good thing. Well, to the last principle now, evaluation and accountability. And the principle here is both teachers and students are much more focused and productive when they feel accountable to someone else. One strength of homeschooling is that you are close to the kids. You evaluate their progress informally all the time to see if they're getting it. The area of accountability, however, is a potential weakness in the homeschool model. It can be overcome. I once had a friend confide to me that he wanted to compete in a fencing competition, but he couldn't get motivated to practice on a daily basis. I offered to call him every day and ask if he had practiced yet. That made a huge difference for him. Knowing that I was going to call was the little extra push he needed. He won the competition and gave me part of the credit, even though I did almost nothing. All I did was hold him accountable to his own goal, and that helped a lot. Find someone who cares that you accomplish your goals and who is willing to support and encourage you. That could be dad, it could be a good friend, or someone else in a homeschool support group. Hold children accountable for being cooperative and diligent, for putting forth their best effort. Grades are punitive by nature. It's better to track goals and accomplishments than to give grades. If students don't learn something right away, keep working on it until they do. If you decide they're not ready for it, drop it and come back later. Hold students accountable for completing their work on time, especially as they reach high school age. This is one thing that has caused a few homeschool students trouble once they get to college or the work world, is that they're so used to being able to complete things when they complete them and not working under deadlines. So it's a good thing to start working with your kids on deadlines, at least in the high school ages. So here are some recommendations for accountability. As a teacher, find someone to support and encourage you, to hold you accountable. Hold kids accountable. Dads can ask, "What did you learn today?" Insist on an answer. If kids know that question will be coming every day, they'll be ready for it. Celebrate when you reach a goal. Well, I talked about a lot in 1 hour, but we're done, and I hope you learned something. I hope you're more aware of what you're doing well, of the strengths that just come along with the homeschooling model. I also hope you've chosen at least one specific achievable goal to work on. Let me encourage you now to engage in an ongoing process of improvement. Don't aim for perfection. Just aim to improve in one or more of these areas: vision and goals, nurturing relationships, structure, consistency, balance, communication, planning and preparation, instruction, practice, and evaluation accountability. Focus on one thing at a time. Take one step at a time. It is a process. Begin now and keep on keeping on. Celebrate success. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I want to make one final observation. Long ago, families were the central economic units in society. Most productive work took place at home or on the farm. In towns and cities, fathers might travel to a place of employment to earn money to support the family. But the important stuff still happened at home, and the excursions from the home were for the purpose of nurturing and supporting it. During the Industrial Revolution, that began to change. More and more people of all ages left home to go to work and returned home tired. The center of life migrated to the workplace. Later, when public schools began, the center of kids' lives migrated to school. Home became mainly a place to rest and refuel, to head back out to where the really important stuff was happening, at work and at school. The concept of home began to fade. But everybody longs for a place to call home. In the TV sitcom Cheers, the theme song said, "Where everybody knows your name, and it's always just the same." That song expresses the longing in the human heart for home. I found the following quote posted on the wall of a friend's house years ago, and it expresses my vision for home. Home is where you can be silent and still be heard, where you can ask and find out who you are, where people laugh with you about yourself, where sorrow is divided and joy is multiplied, where we share and love and grow. My very best wishes to you as you build a home on the only lasting foundation, according to the Bible, Jesus Christ.